This is Pop Culture Confidential, and I'm Christina Yerling Biru. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the show and to my conversation with filmmaker Rebecca Miller about her outstanding and deeply insightful new series, Mr. Scorsese, a 5-part portrait of the legendary director now streaming on Apple TV+. I was really happy for a chance to talk with Rebecca Miller about some of the moments in her film that really stayed with me, from the incredible range of people she spoke with, including Scorsese's oldest friends, to the themes of faith, violence, and redemption that have shaped one of the most influential filmmakers of our time. Let's get started. Martin Scorsese has been such a part of my cinematic life always. I thought I knew so much about him because he's been open, but your journey through his work really opened up a new understanding for me. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Thanks. Glad you felt that way.
One of the ways you illuminate him so beautifully is by showing us the people who shaped him, his friends, his collaborators, the women in his life. You introduced some childhood friends. Tell me a little bit about his friends and how they're reflected in his films.
Well, he tells early on, he tells a story to two of his friends, one of whom he met when he was in, I think, kindergarten, which is just so great when they start talking about kindergarten. And another friend, Robert Urcola, who was a huge influence on him and a huge friend, and in fact appeared in his early films as an adolescent. So, they told a story about how they found a body missing its hands in an alley where they used to dump bodies in Little Italy. And they were looking at the thing and it was well dressed, but had no hands. And they stuck a pencil in his head to make sure to see it if it was a bullet hole. So that was something that he actually experienced, which, the idea of violence wasn't an abstract thing for him, and it was really, I thought, really interesting um, to talk to the firsthand sources. I really wanted a sense of really being present. It's also his father. You can see the way his father talks about, the connected people in the neighborhood. His mother is saying it's a dangerous neighborhood. I always told him not to talk, if you see something, don't say anything. And he said, to me, they're good people. They don't bother me. And, you see how he's still almost living in the shadow of fear of these people. And that the idea of what it is to live in fear that way. And the idea that there is somebody very, very powerful watching you, is something that I tried to make palpable in the film. And having the friends there was very important for that. And also for his childhood, you touch on his illness and him being bedridden for so long with asthma. And this actually became a cinematic perspective. I mean, literally. Yeah, I mean, he talks about being stuck inside on the third floor window, looking out, looking down, and not being able to go outside when he was having asthma attacks and not being able to play with anybody and being sort of imprisoned there. And he's looking down and then he says, that's why I love high shots so much. And he said, seriously, that's why, and then you see, I put all these films where you see, Taxi Driver, Gangs of New York, etc., Goodfellas, where you see looking down through a window. And so it really informed his way of looking at the world.
He wanted to get out and play in the snow like other kids, but he couldn't. He used to watch from behind the window.
In the front, third floor front, I'd look out the window and see, the world below. I'd be always looking out the window. That's why I like high angle shots. Seriously, it's like a fresco coming to life.
If you ever went to the apartment, there were old windows with small panes. So he has to watch pane by pane. What does that remind you of? It's film.
And you mentioned his mother. What kind of influence did she have on him, both personally and artistically, really?
Well, you can tell from her personality. He says at a certain point, I realized when he made Italian American, which is I highly recommend, which is a great documentary about his parents and about life as immigrants in New York City and in that part of the century. And she talks about what it was like to live in like the having the toilet down the hall and all that stuff. But her personality is so tremendously, it's so big, and it's so she has so much dynamism and so much charisma. That's the word I would use. I mean, I think she really had, to me, she had the personality of an artist, really.
I was also so interested in several of the women that you showed in this portrait of him and how what an effect they have. I mean, of course, Velma Schoonmaker, but also the story with Sharon Stone. How did working with her change that film, and what happened there?
Well, she tells the story of getting there and realizing that they had blocked a scene without her. Uh, you know, Marty, De Niro, Pesci. And
I
she
mean,
was like,
this is a gang of guys, right? I mean,
right,
that's
who've
really
been
a
working
thing about
together.
Scorsese. Yeah.
Right, been working together all their lives. And she said, uh-oh, they're going to be the main players, and I'm just going to be moved around like a potted plant. I love that. I love that.
Yes.
And so she started sort of on a campaign to follow Marty around and get the kind of attention that she felt these other guys were getting when he would go into the trailers, each of their trailers, discuss the day with them. She was like, I want that. And she just kept following him around. And this poor man, he's got this immense, production on his shoulders. And she's following him around the whole time. And finally, he's like, what do you want, Sharon? What can I do for you? And she said, I want you to come into my trailer the way you get, come into the guy's trailer. And he comes in and they started, discuss things, and he's giving her the time and realize, and then they really developed this beautiful working relationship to a point where she tells the story of like she's got to do two very emotional, heavy scenes on top of each other, including her own death scene. And he comes and he holds her hand between setups so that she won't lose her thread. He literally is just there for her. And I think, in the end, I do think that she ended up with the great performance of her career, and possibly
Oh,
one
if
of
you
the
ask me,
greatest.
should have been Oscar.
I
Her
totally
performance in that
agree. I
amazing.
absolutely love that performance.
Yeah. And one of the things that really touched me as well is when the interview you have with his daughters, one of his daughters says, we all had a different father, which is so revealing, right? Who got which father?
Well, I think, you can see from the interviews themselves that he was so young. He was 20, I think 21, 22 years old when he had his first child was, Kathy, and you can see where the tremendous struggle to make something of himself, to not only make a living, but make a mark as an artist. The dissolution of that marriage in the face of his just needing to be doing what he was doing and not, they were too young. And that then but you also feel the influence in her of his parents. In a way, you feel more the early life in her, the way that she is. Then you have Domenica, who was born in the middle of, of gangs of, excuse me, New York, New York, and the sort of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, as she puts it, and the struggle there to, the beauty of the relationship that she achieves with him when she's working with him, and where you're really seeing the very heart of the kind of, you know, what she talks about. She talks about, I think it's uh, the light of a lighthouse, and when he's working with you, it's right there. You
If
feel
the
the beam
spotlight
of
is on
light.
you,
Right.
yeah.
And then, of course, then you have Francesca, who is the daughter that he was really able to raise the most. He was really able to completely be with, and inevitably that's going to create a different relationship. And I think that it's not uncommon that you see when particularly a man has multiple families, they all have different experiences. And this is just a very, probably because his life was so intense, and that it's a stark example of that, but that's just true of life.
Right. I was wondering from a personal perspective. I mean, your father is Arthur Miller, and your father was and Scorsese were chronicling America in several decades at the similar times. Was he ever discussed in your house and his vision of America?
Honestly, I don't remember that, but I'm glad you mentioned the idea of a grander project having to do with the chronicling America, because I do think that in the case of both of these artists, you do need to go, of course, you want to go micro, you want to go into the parenthood, the partners, the life, that life as a man, but you also, and as an artist, and where do the impulses come to make the work. But I think it's really important to understand somebody who becomes so important in their culture. You have to go macro and look at the larger country, what was going on in the periods to enable Scorsese to achieve what he did. You can't completely take him out of his eras, nor can you take the eras out of his work. So, Taxi Driver is very much a movie about the 70s and made possible by the 70s and what was going on in the film industry at that time. Then you go and you look at a film like Color of Money. Well, Color of Money is reflective of its time too, and the 80s and so on, what was going on, what could be financed, how he was coming out of the hole, a personal hole, but also how do people survive as artists in an atmosphere like that? It's sometimes I think that's an important thing to remember as for all artists who are looking at this piece of work. You're seeing that, we don't live in a vacuum. Especially filmmakers are utterly dependent on their collaborators, but also on the culture as a whole, because it's an expensive medium. And, there are forces, there are cultural forces, economic forces, and political forces, which all have a bearing on what we're allowed to do and what we can do.
Yeah, and one of those forces within him that I think was a big question for you, I understand, starting off this project, was his constant wrestling with being Catholic, faith and violence, so to speak. What did you find out about that and where he stands today in this wrestling that he's gone through?
Well, as there's there's a beautiful line he says at a certain point in the documentary where he says, when you understand, once you completely understand your faith, you'll be dead. You're just feeling your way in the dark. But the main thing is you're making progress. And I think that he is in a constant dialogue and he's on a road, and I think that that road continues and will continue for the rest of his life. He is somebody who started asking himself the big religious questions when he was a very young child. And he never stopped. He wasn't always in the church, so to speak, but he was always inside the thinking of what the essential big questions of like who are we as human beings? Where is God? And all of that.
In your film, we really see that this little boy from Elizabeth Street is still there. But how, in your view, after following him so long, how has he changed the most? What are his biggest lessons, if I
Well, I think, perhaps, they talk, it's one of the things that's addressed in the documentary is the issue of anger and how he was able to kind of use anger, subsume it, make it that he was somebody who went from somebody who was so angry he could destroy a room in rage to somebody who's able to, through meditation, perhaps through whatever it is that sands us down over time, to bring the anger down so that it could just be useful to him but doesn't control him, because in the end, if you want to live, you need to be able to control that. And so it's like, I think that's a big thing. I think but I think if there's a unifying principle in the film, it's the idea of the sinner and having mercy on the sinner. And I think that's where Catholicism and violence actually kind of come together for him.
Who are we? Are we intrinsically good or evil? This is the struggle. I struggle with it all the time. Where are we going? What stories do we want to tell? I knew I could express myself with pictures, but I had to find my own way.
One of the things I've always reflected over with Marty is that he's such an excellent talker. He knows every inch of cinematic history and he tells you about that, but also you see what a remarkable observer he is. And you see that very much in your film. What makes it that these things can coexist?
Observance and knowledge?
Yeah, observance, and how he's such a talker. He seems to fill the room, but at the same time, he seems to be observing at the same time. I
Oh,
don't know
yeah.
if you understand my point, but there's
I
something
think
very
that,
specific about him.
all artists have a little bit of alienation built into them where they are both in the moment and not in the moment. And they're also strangers in a strange land. And I think that it's the sadness of being an artist, but it's also the power that you can see from outside what is going on, really. It's like a kind of X-ray vision. And I think he developed that really young. And uh, and that the theme of exile is very strong in the piece overall, I would say.
Mhm. Finally, Rebecca, you were talking before about a picture of America and chronicling America, and you as an artist and an author and thinking about Marty, what would you say is his America? And
Well, I think he's given us a portrait of ourselves, which is immensely entertaining, um, and rather dark, includes greed, violence, but also a kind of burning desire for kind of redemption in some of the films, a kind of uh, almost evangelical quality that like you see in Taxi Driver or Mean Streets or Silence or there it's definitely there in some of the films, that sort of struggle. It's the great struggle in his work, that struggle between good and evil is very intense, and you can't always tell who's good and who's evil either. So his work he doesn't judge. He refuses to judge, which is sometimes I think frustrating for people who just want some kind of answer in a film. And yeah, in the end it's a conjuring. All his films are conjurings, they're hypnosis. It's finally in the end you can't, as much as like you want to take them apart with Thelma and everything, you can't, in the end you can't take them apart because you can't undo the mystery. The mystery is the mystery.
what's your understanding what he has left to tell? Does he have a movie? His movies that he still
I
has
don't know. I
coming.
mean, I think that he's more and more, it seems like he's very really interested in relationships between people. It seems like that's, you know, uh, questions of personal responsibility and things like that. I get the sense that he's moving toward that, but I really don't know.
Oh,
I don't know
interesting.
what he's doing next.
They want me to wrap up. Thank you very much. Thank you
Thank
for
you,
this time and for the
Christina.
film.
It's
Thank
good
you.
to meet you.
Good
Thank
to
you.
meet you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you so much to Rebecca Miller. Don't miss Mr. Scorsese on Apple TV Plus. And thank you so much for listening. Pop Culture Confidential is a part of the Evergreen Podcast Network. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time.